Hello and welcome to rates of reaction. Okay, so we've talked a bit about rate of reaction, and we're going to go into a lot more detail in this lecture. So the speed of different chemical reactions varies hugely. Some reactions are very fast and some are very slow, and the speed of a reaction is called the rate of reaction. So if you're looking at the rate of these reactions, okay, rusting is a slow reaction, and you know this anecdotally in your own life. You've all been exposed to metal that has rusted, and it's not something that takes place in a few seconds or a few minutes. It's something that can take place over days or weeks. Explosions are very fast. The chemical weathering of rocks are very slow. Sodium in water is extremely fast, and rotting fruit is slow. So reactions take place when particles of reactants collide with a certain amount of energy. And we've talked about this a great deal. The energy is called the activation energy, and it's different for each reaction. So the rate of a reaction depends on three things: the frequency of collisions between particles, the energy with which particles collide. Okay, so because if particles collide with less energy, then the activation energy, which is the energy needed for the reaction to occur, then the reaction will not occur. The particles will just bounce off of each other. And the third is the geometry with which particles collide. Okay, so let's look at these. So anything that increases the number of successful collisions between reactant particles will speed up the reaction. So there's some factors that can do this. One is increased temperature. The other is increased concentration of dissolved reactants and increased pressure of gaseous reactants, and increased surface area of solid reactants. Okay, so let's talk about each of these. Oh yeah, and use of a catalyst. So measuring the rate of a reaction means measuring the rate of change over a period of time. This means measuring the change in the amount of reactant or the amount of a product. So what can you measure to calculate the rate of reaction between magnesium and hydrochloric acid? So here's your word equation. Magnesium plus hydrochloric acid yields magnesium chloride plus hydrogen. The amount of magnesium used up, the amount of hydrochloric acid used up, the amount of magnesium chloride produced, and the amount of hydrogen produced are ways that you can measure the rate of reaction. Okay, so reactions do not proceed at a steady rate. Generally, they start off at a certain speed, then they get slower and slower until they stop. And as the reaction progresses, the concentration of reactants decreases, right? Which makes sense because as two reactants are colliding, if they collide with enough energy, they will react and they will become the product. Okay? And so that's decreasing the concentration of reactants. And it reduces the frequency of collisions between particles, which means that the reaction is going to slow down. Okay, so if you look at this model, you can see reactant A are the blue particles, reactant B are the red particles. So when you first introduce them together, okay, none of them have collided yet. It's at 0% reaction, and that's going to be at the very start of right when you're introducing the reactants together. So then as particles start to collide, remember from random movement, okay, if they have enough energy, they're going to collide and react. So it starts off a little slower where only a few particles have collided, and you can see the purple there is the product. Okay, then it starts out, again, where 75% of the reactants have bumped into each other and you have more product. Okay, and then at the end of the reaction, 100% of the reactants have bumped into each other with enough energy to react, and all you have left are products. Okay, and that's when the reaction stops. Okay. So how does temperature affect the rate of particle collision? So I said we were going to talk about each of those factors that affect rate of reaction, so we're going to talk about these in detail. The higher the temperature, the faster the rate of a reaction. And that makes a lot of sense because the higher the temperature, the more energy is available for the reactants. And in many reactions, a rise in temperature of 10 degrees Celsius causes the rate of reaction to approximately double. Okay, so why does increased temperature increase the rate of reaction? At a higher temperature, particles have more energy. This means they are moving faster, and they are more likely to collide with other particles. And then when they do collide, they do so with more energy, and so the number of successful collisions increases. So the higher the temperature, the more energy and speed particles have. This will increase the frequency of collisions with other particles and the energy with which they collide, and so it increases rate of reaction. Okay, so food goes bad because chemical reactions are taking place. So why does food remain usable for so much longer if it's kept in a freezer? It's because the low temperature in the freezer means that particles are moving so slow and with so much reduced energy that the particles aren't colliding, the reaction isn't occurring, or it's happening so slow that the food is being preserved. So before microwave ovens were common, many people used pressure cookers to cook food more quickly. In a pressure cooker, water doesn't boil until it reaches about 115 degrees Celsius. So why does this help cooking? The higher temperature means that particles are moving much more quickly and they have more energy, which means that there are more successful collisions between particles and the food cooks more quickly. The reaction between sodium thiosulfate and hydrochloric acid produces sulfur. Okay, there's your word equation. There's your balanced symbol equation. Okay, sulfur is a solid, and so it turns the solution cloudy. Okay, that's our precipitant. The effect of increasing temperature on the rate of reaction can be measured by comparing how long it takes the solution to turn cloudy. Okay? So to run the experiment investigating the effect of temperature on the rate of reaction, you mark a cross on a piece of paper, add a known amount of sodium thiosulfate to a beaker, place it on a piece of paper, add a known amount of hydrochloric acid to the beaker, and immediately start a stopwatch. The solution will begin to turn cloudy. As soon as the cross can no longer be seen, stop the clock and note the time. So you can repeat the experiment at different temperatures using the same volume of reactants and compare how long it takes the cross to disappear. So we did a similar reaction, except we did the changing colors. So remember in lab, we did the reaction kinetics experiment where we looked at the solution changing color, and we were measuring how heat and concentration affected how quickly the colors were changing. The changing colors were indicative of the chemical reaction occurring. Okay, so so here are the results of the experiment I just described to you. When looking down into the beaker, the cross will become more faint over time, and the time taken for the cross to disappear can be used as the time of the reaction. Sorry, none of these animations work. So the higher the concentration of a dissolved reactant, the faster the rate of reaction. Okay, so we saw this as well in our reaction kinetics lab because we were looking at temperature and concentration. And when we increased concentration of the dissolved reactant, the reaction rate increased. So why does increased concentration increase the rate of reaction? At a higher concentration, there are more particles in the same amount of space. And so that means that particles are more likely to collide with other particles. So in this model, you see a lower concentration, but if you increase the concentration, it's just they're more likely to hit each other. So reactive metals like magnesium react with acids to produce hydrogen gas. We know this. There's your word equation. There's your balanced symbol equation. The effect of increasing concentration on the rate of reaction can be measured by comparing how quickly hydrogen is produced using different concentrations of hydrochloric acid. Okay, and this is very similar to the reaction we did in lab. We looked at how quickly the colors changed, right? So remember, the colors changing is indicative of the reaction occurring, okay? So we looked at how quickly the colors started changing as we changed the concentration. So in this specific with the magnesium, this is a very, very typical Cambridge reaction that it's highly likely that you'll be asked about this in your Cambridge exam. So you're looking at magnesium and hydrochloric acid, and this is the experimental setup. So you're going to need the conical flask that has a magnesium ribbon in hydrochloric acid, and then there's a rubber bung, a rubber connector, a glass tube, and a gas syringe. And if you take a minute, you can pause the video and really look at this model. I'm sure that you'll see that the gas syringe is collecting gas from the reaction. So you would measure the fixed volume of hydrochloric acid. You would add a known mass of magnesium, and you would start the stopwatch. You measure the volume of hydrogen gas that's being collected in the syringe at regular intervals until there are no more gas bubbles being produced. And then you can repeat the experiment using a different concentration of hydrochloric acid, but the same volume of acid and the same mass of magnesium. And you compare the rate at which the hydrogen is being produced. Okay, I encourage you to pause the video and rewind it and look at these models again and think about how temperature and concentration affects rate of reaction. It should be something that you can describe in detail in writing. So, okay, now thinking about pressure. So why does increasing the pressure of a gaseous reactant increase the rate of reaction? So as pressure increases, the space in which the gas particles are moving becomes smaller. Okay, so the same number of particles are in a smaller space, and the gas particles are closer together, increasing frequency of collisions, and so, thus increasing the rate of reaction. Okay, surface area. So this one isn't always intuitive to students right away, but after you really think about it and you look at a model, I think you'll understand it. Any reaction involving a solid can only take place at the surface of the solid. Right, so if you put a big chunk of a reactant in to see if it's going to react, only the part of the reactant that's on the outside of this cube here, or the outside of this like big chunk of reactant, is going to be exposed to the other reactant. Okay, so but if you split it into many pieces, the surface area increases. So there's more surface for the second reactant to react with. So this means that it's going to increase the rate of reaction. So the smaller the pieces, the larger the surface area, meaning more collisions and a faster rate of reaction. So sometimes, chemists want the reaction to go slow, and so they'll put a large chunk of solid reactant in because they want the reaction to occur over a long period of time. But if you want the reaction to occur faster, then you would increase surface area by breaking that chunk up into small pieces. So marble chips, this is a reaction between a carbonate and acid. Marble chips are made of calcium carbonate. They react with hydrochloric acid to produce carbon dioxide. So here's your word equation. Here's your balance symbol equation. The effect of increasing surface area on the rate of reaction can be measured by comparing how quickly the mass of the reactants decreases during using marble chips of different sizes. So what equipment do you need for this? You need a conical flask. You need a wool plug to keep that gas in. You need some hydrochloric acid, calcium carbonate chips, and a scale. So to run the experiment, you measure out your fixed volume of hydrochloric acid. You add a fixed mass of calcium carbonate, okay, and you put that wool plug in to make sure that the gas isn't escaping. And you begin by taking mass readings straight away and continue until there's no further change in mass. And you would repeat the experiment using the same mass of calcium carbonate, but a smaller chip size and the same volume of hydrochloric acid. And then you would compare the rate at which the mass of reactants decreases. Okay, so lastly, catalysts. So what are catalysts? We know that catalysts are substances that change the rate of a reaction without actually being used up in the reaction. Catalysts are very important in industry because products can be made more quickly, saving time and money. And they're also extremely important in our body. Almost all of the chemical reactions in our body are controlled by catalysts. And they can also avoid having to use high temperatures, so they can save fuel and reduce pollution in industry. Catalysts are very important in living cells. This is, like I just said, biological catalysts are special types of proteins called enzymes. So many catalysts are transition metals or compounds of transition metals, and different reactions use different catalysts. So for example, nickel is a catalyst in the production of margarine. Iron is a catalyst in the production of ammonia from nitrogen and hydrogen. Platinum is a catalyst in the catalytic converters of car exhausts. It catalyzes the conversion of carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxide into less polluting carbon dioxide and nitrogen, which is super cool. So how do they work? For a chemical reaction to take place, we know energy is needed to break the existing bonds in the reactants so that new bonds can be formed in the products. The reacting parts of particles need to be brought together. Different catalysts work in different ways, but most solid catalysts work by lowering the amount of energy needed for the reaction to take place. So again, catalysts work by lowering the activation energy of a reaction. When hydrogen and oxygen are mixed in a jar, there is no reaction. If a platinum wire is added, the gases react instantly with a loud pop, producing water. So how does platinum catalyze this reaction? So you have a platinum wire, okay, and you have molecules of hydrogen and oxygen. The gas molecules are brought together onto the surface of the platinum. They are adsorbed. The molecules are much closer together and their bonds are weakened, which lowers the activation energy of the reaction. So I encourage you to pause and to listen to this again. Look at the model and listen to me explain it again. Read it, make sure you understand it. The larger the surface area of the platinum, the quicker the reaction. So hydrogen peroxide decomposes into water and oxygen. There's your word equation. There's your balanced symbol equation. And without a catalyst, this reaction is really slow and it can take months. But with a catalyst, like manganese oxide, the reaction can take place in just minutes. The catalysts never produce more product. They just produce the same amount, but quicker. Okay, so I hope you learned a lot about rate of reaction. I encourage you to go back and watch this again. You really need to be able to explain how each of the variables affects rate of reaction in writing for your exam on Monday.